opportunities in Arab countries, bringing together finance ministers and central bank governors, owner of the Saudi Arabian Monetary Authority, Dr. Ahmed Al-Khalifi, and the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, Ms. Kristalina Georgieva. The event will provide a unique opportunity to further dialogue on enhancing access to opportunities in Arab countries and leverage the global and regional experiences on this critical issue. And now a short video will be played highlighting some of the exceptional efforts that were made by the G20 community under the Saudi G20 presidency, which supported enhancing access to opportunities. Then we will hand over the floor to His Excellency the Saudi Finance Minister for his opening remarks. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Your Excellency Minister Al-Jud'an. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسعدني الترحيب بكم جميعا في هذا الحدث رفيع المستوى بعنوان تعزيز إتاحة الفرص في الدول العربية، والذي تنظمه رئاسة المملكة لمجموعة ال20 بالتعاون مع صندوق النقد الدولي وبمشاركة وحضور أصحاب المعالي وزراء المالية ومحافظي البنوك المركزية للدول العربية. قبل أن نبدأ الاجتماع أود أن نعرب عن خالص العزاء والمواساة لشعب وحكومة الكويت والأمتين العربية والإسلامية الفقيد صاحب السمو الشيخ صباح الأحمد الجابر الصباح رحمه الله. فقدت الأمتين العربية والإسلامية قائدا ملهما، نسأل الله أن يتغمده بواسع رحمته ومغفرته وأن يسكنه فسيح جناته. نظرا لوجود عدد من الحضور الذين لا يتحدثون اللغة العربية، اسمحوا لي أن نستكمل الحوار باللغة الإنجليزية. Dear colleagues, before we begin our meeting, I would like to express our sincere condolences to the people and government of Kuwait and the Arab and Islamic nations over the passing of His Highness Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah. The Arab and Islamic nations have lost indeed a wise leader. May Allah bestow mercy upon him and rest him in his paradise. I would like to welcome you all to this high-level event on enhancing access to opportunities in Arab countries, which the Saudi G20 presidency is co-organizing with the International Monetary Fund. Indeed, it is a great pleasure to co-host this event with my good friend, Kristalina, the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. As everyone is quite aware, 2020 is not the year we were expecting. The speed, severity, and spread in which the pandemic shocked the world and the global economy is unlike anything we have experienced before. This pandemic knows no borders and has caused tragic loss of life of well over 1 million people to date, with the infection rate still at elevated levels. This is not only the most serious challenge that the world has faced since the Great Depression of the 1930s, but is also one where the international community is uncertain of the length and depth of the COVID-19 pandemic and its intertwined social, health, and economic impacts. It is therefore imperative that countries respond individually and collectively to safeguard people's life and livelihood and support the global economy during and after this phase. In response to this pandemic, the G20 members are taking immediate and exceptional measures to address the COVID-19 pandemic, including through the implementation of unprecedented fiscal, monetary, and financial stability actions. The G20 ministers, the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors endorsed the G20 action plan commitments, which includes launching the debt service suspension initiative for the benefit of the poorest countries to avail them of better liquidity resources. To date, the total benefited amounts to Arab countries is around $500 million. The COVID-19 pandemic's disproportionate impact on vulnerable groups has reinforced the need to enhance access to opportunities for all, including in the Arab region. In July 2020, the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors endorsed, under the Saudi G20 presidency, the G20 menu of policy options to enhance access to opportunities for all. This menu, together with the background paper and the topic produced by the G20 for the G20 by the IMF and the World Bank, provides a valuable set of policy options that can be leveraged to support the immediate response to the COVID-19 pandemic and to move our economies toward the strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive recovery. Today's event will provide us with an opportunity to highlight timely regional issues and advance the discussion on inclusive growth in the region. In this context, I would like to commend the IMF for their focus on inclusive growth in the region. With the support of the IMF, the World Bank, and the regional institutions, we need to strengthen our regional efforts on inclusive growth, as enhanced access to opportunities remain out of reach, unfortunately, for many people within this region. I look forward to an informed discussion on policies to enhance access to opportunities in the Arab countries, with the aim of building the foundation for a strong and inclusive recovery. With this, let me pass the floor to Kristalina, the Managing Director of the IMF, to deliver her opening remarks and chair the first session of the event. Kristalina, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. I want to most sincerely thank you, Minister Al-Jadaan, for the incredible leadership you, the Saudi presidency, has offered in this very troubled time. We have seen phenomenal action to counter this crisis, and only because of it, there is a floor under the world economy. I want to also join you and everybody today in mourning the death of His Highness Amir Sheikh Sabah Al Sabah, a strong leader of his people, a strong leader for the region, and above all, someone who deeply cared about the well-being of people, offering opportunities, especially to those that were less fortunate. And that makes the topic of today so very relevant in the context of his life and his legacy. We are going to discuss today how we can work relentlessly to make sure that everybody has access to opportunities for their own sake and for their ability to contribute to their communities, to their countries, and how to do that in the context of the COVID-19 crisis. Budgets are stretched thin and needs are growing. So how to deal with this? It reminds me, my father, when I was growing up, very often using an Arab proverb, do not delay the work of today for tomorrow. And I think it is very good to start from that. We have even more pressure not to delay the work of today. And it is one in this region to take the crisis as an opportunity for transformation. We face headwinds from the pandemic, but we also have tailwinds from continued spending to fight the pandemic. How can we make it a resource to enhance opportunities, to move forward a digital transformation in the region as well as worldwide? Decisions that are taken today will impact the lives of more than 420 million Arabs for years to come. Preparing them for a fast-changing global economy cannot be delayed. And I want to focus on three areas where this work can bring a new impetus for growth in the region. First, improve health, education, and social safety nets. That can be paid by progressive taxation of both income and property and goods, with better prioritization of spending and increased efficiency. Fewer children would die premature death, more girls would learn, fewer people would live in poverty. And we know that a lot has been achieved in the region, but we also know that the quality of spending is not as good always as you want it to be, that there is an efficiency gap, and that if that gap was to be close one third, that we would have, if it was totally closed, the Arab world could close a third of the health and education gap without new spending. So improving efficiency, don't need to spend more money, you get the impact. And let's see some examples from the region. Jordan, initial COVID response included a quick lockdown with widespread affordable testing, steps to reduce economic harm. They included immediate tax relief to companies, cash support for vulnerable daily wage workers. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, when you look at what they have done in testing, they are among the best in the world, of course, with benefits for the economy. And I think the region has a lot of good experience to share and lift it up. Let me get to my second point, and it is absolutely essential. Increased employment of young people and women. Addressing skill mismatches, removing gender-based restrictions, strengthening childcare, and other support will help. And I want to zero on the progress Saudi Arabia has made. Just before the pandemic hit, we were in Riyadh, and I had this chance to meet with an incredibly exciting and dynamic group of women. And they talked about the transformation that has happened rapidly in their lives and the lives of many women in Saudi Arabia. Introducing workplace anti-discrimination legislation, banning pay discrimination based on gender, age, and other irrelevant factors, smart enforcement of measures that are already coming to help in this very difficult time. And let me finish with the third area that is likely to be a key for success, and it is closing the digital divide. Access to the internet means access to education, and we see it today. Those who have it, they continue to learn. Those that don't have it fall off the educational grid. Access to commerce, to financial and government services, access to benefits, all this is now possible when there is access to the internet. It is truly an access to opportunity. And obviously investments have to be made, but they are both affordable and investments, they pay back very quickly. And actually we saw it, digital access, Morocco, providing cash benefits to 85% of eligible informal workers using mobile phones. How can we help? Well, one thing we do always is to integrate knowledge and offer it in effective manner. And this is the Enhancing Access to Opportunity report, a paper we launched yesterday, Social Spending for Inclusive Growth in the Middle East and Central Asia. And Mohammed, just to remind us how it all works when we are all together and Angel Gurria is with us, I will do this. Here is the paper, done together with the World Bank. We support capacity development, and of course we support with financial resources. We have extended additional credit to 8 Arab countries this year for a total of 26 billion, and we are well positioned to do more. As we prepare for Marrakesh, we want to stay engaged with the Arab world, youthful, dynamic, so we can have next year, inshallah, a meeting in person for our annual meetings. Let me thank you again, shukran, and switch immediately in my second duty, which is to facilitate a panel discussion with fantastic panelists. Ghada Wali, former Egyptian Minister for Social Solidarity, currently Director General and Executive Director at the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. The economics professor Stefan Dercon from Oxford. He is a policy advisor to the UK Foreign Secretary. Guy Ryder, needs no introduction, Director General of ILO. And our very own Chief Economist, Gita Gopinath. They're going to give us a very diverse perspective on the topic we discussed. And I'm going to start with Gita, since she's going to give us the summary of the paper I flagged. And the question I want Gita you to concentrate on is, how does uneven access to opportunities impact inequality and impact growth? Based on the research you have done, how we can, in this COVID-triggered recession, do our best to expand access to opportunity, expand inclusion, and boost growth. So, Gita, you're the first from the panel to speak.
Thank you, Kristalina. We know that this crisis is going to have a major impact on economic output. So we've estimated that about $12 trillion of output will be lost this year and next year. We also know that this crisis will have a tremendous impact on poverty, with up to about 90 million people being pushed into extreme poverty. There are many features of this crisis that are going to make the problem of inequality worse. And let me be specific of what they are. So one, for instance, when you look at labor market outcomes, you've had a sharp increase in unemployment in many parts of the world, or at least a sharp reduction in hours worked. And you see that it's the low-skilled workers who are being much harder hit than the high-skilled workers in this crisis, because they tend to be more involved in contact-intensive sectors. And we also know from past crises that these effects can be very long-lasting. So, when you get a bad hit to your income in a recession, this can continue for a very long time. And so this effect can be prolonged. The second feature, of course, is that we're seeing women are being affected more than men because lockdowns and shutdowns have a bigger effect on them, given their responsibilities at home. A third thing to keep in mind is that we enter this crisis with unequal access to healthcare in many parts of the world, and not very well developed healthcare systems. And this is first and foremost a health crisis. And so we are very concerned about the situation where there is not adequate healthcare provided. And that can, again, affect the most vulnerable in society. And this has a huge effect also on human capital going forward. And then there is the piece of education, which is that something unique to this crisis is this requirement for children to do more distance learning. Now, those who have access to the appropriate digital infrastructure in higher income households are able to deal with this much better than low income households are. So this crisis certainly gives rise to many reasons for why we would see an increase in inequality, not just within generation between low and high skilled workers, but across generation, between kids coming from low-income families versus those coming from high-income families, and from the old versus the young, and from women and men. So, the countries have taken many important steps, and the steps include providing lifelines to households, making sure that there is basic income being provided, and that has helped to maintain basic consumption levels, but not in every part of the world, but in many parts of the world. And this is something that will need to be continued. It's very important that if there are future resurgences of the virus, that every effort is made to ensure that children get the education they need, because this is not easy to reverse when you start out with lost education. And I think going forward into the future, we have to be in a world with much more better social safety nets. So this is the lessons that we're learning from this crisis, Christine.
Thank you very much, Geeta. Very helpful. I will come back to you on, if you put this in the broader international experience, what do we learn? But let us, before we do that, get inputs from Stefan on the situation of low-income and fragile states. In particular, there are some of those in the region. How are they being affected? Geeta talked about increase in poverty. What are the trends in this group of countries? And most importantly, what can be done? What can the G20 do? What can institutions like the IMF do? Stefan.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And look, it's actually quite striking if you look across the world in terms of the experience with low-income countries and more fragile countries. There's actually quite a bit of heterogeneity, difference to the experiences. In some, the patterns of the big impact from the health shock are similarly very strong. But what has been very striking, for example, in the African context, is that a health crisis doesn't seem to have been as disruptive and hasn't got us to the same kind of extent of disruption than we have seen, say, for example, in, say, India or in South Asia in general. And that actually is very striking, because it also leads us to think that maybe the first shock, the health shock itself, is not in the end really the most important end game for some of these lower income countries and some of the fragile countries. I'm actually, for the last few months, getting increasingly concerned from what will happen next, which is the economic crisis that it has. Better off countries have been able to do, all kinds of, whatever we will call it, quantitative easing, other kinds of fiscal type of measures. These countries just never have the option. Their economic shocks are going to be much more severe. And they are, of course, also suffering from the big commodity price shocks, the remittances shocks. Some of them became important in the Horn of Africa already for some of the countries. That's all disappeared as well. Now, if this is the macro, with very little levers for finance ministers, of course, that the G20 has taken in terms of debt has been very important, but it has to go further. It cannot leave it there. There is a lot of these countries have their balance sheets also, Chinese commercial banks and policy banks on it. We need to start thinking about how we actually can go further in terms of debt initiatives as well. And there is another side to it. These governments are often not strong enough to act on their own. They also need support by humanitarian systems. The humanitarian gap is quite dramatic in some of the more fragile places. And we need to just keep in mind that a lot of countries are not providing that many resources. But, what can we do? If I may very quickly give a couple of things that hopefully we can try to be constructive. And let's largely focus here on the lower income countries. And it builds on what Gita is saying. There's though a number of things where there's actually real opportunities as well. There's probably three disruptions. And I think Gita alluded to them already, is that in many countries, the poorest have, relatively speaking, suffer more than other groups. So there's a disruption clearly on inequality. There's also been a disruption in that a lot of these places had to improvise and start finding new ways of doing things and being quite imaginative in their economic policies. And I think the disruption is that when we go back to it, we may not have to do it in the same way in certain things. I'll give you in a moment an example. And then finally, and I think Kristalina has alluded to it, it's the digital side. Surprisingly, many countries have actually been able to respond better and doing things digitally in ways that nobody had ever imagined. I've been all the time, for example, doing meetings with African finance ministries and so on that I would never imagine we just doing, or even with universities doing all kinds of things. So I think that kind of three things are really possible. There's an opportunity to build back more equally. There's an opportunity to build back more resiliently because there's a space for new things in reform terms. I also think there's an opportunity to build back digitally. And to just very quickly say, think of safety nets. We were very worried that very few countries could respond. I think it's something like 140 countries have responded via expanding social protection. And they have actually been doing it. I think we learned that we can do this digitally and build on this. And actually, this is the real opportunity to make safety nets simpler, bring them out digitally, and actually keep on building on the experience we had. Gita already mentioned education. Education, there's a real opportunity, not just to get the children back into school, but to learn from some of the countries that had to do certain things digitally, but also on top of that, taking the opportunities to actually do blended learning in the classroom. Technology has been incredibly helpful. There's incredibly good evidence from India that actually digital technology can help to teach at the right level, to get very quick diagnostics how well children are doing, and to build on top of that to improve them. And then finally, we can start thinking about, well, look, if it's proved so hard to keep the usual companies afloat, but others have been more resilient, let's learn quickly, what does it mean for the structure of our economies, for our reforms agendas in labor markets, and in the kind of sectors we can have? If I may say, and forgive me if I say so, many countries in your region are quite stuck in economic structures. This is an opportunity to actually be more creatively and build creative reform agendas around changing where the incentives are in your economies, and then to move forward as well. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great intervention. Thank you. And there are two observations I would make from it. One is that we are at a point when we need to zero more attention to the countries that have no access to markets, and yet they have very pressing needs. And I want to recognize that just 2 weeks from now, we would have the annual meetings of the IMF and the World Bank. There would be a G20 finance ministers meeting. It is a chance to zero on where the needs are more severe. And I give you my pledge, and I know I can talk about my very good friend Mohammed, that we would do exactly that. And secondly, to recognize that in many cases, leapfrogging is happening in the most unexpected situations, and we just have to build on that as strongly as we can. Thank you very much, Stefan, for your very good and thought-provoking comments. Let me turn to Guy. If there is one thing that is top of mind universally in rich and poor countries, it is jobs. Is my job going to be there? And I would like us to hear from Guy Ryder, how are labor markets around the world impacted? What does more specifically mean for our conversation on access to opportunities? Guy, very good to see you.
I wonder if you can hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Good, Christina, thank you very much. I can answer your question with one word. The impact has been absolutely devastating on labour markets around the world. And as Geeta alluded to earlier on, we've tried to measure that impact by measuring the actual reduction in hours worked around the world. It makes little sense to look at open unemployment. And the figure globally is that in the second quarter of this year, global hours worked decreased by 17.4%. In the Arab world, in the countries of the Arab League, that figure goes up to 19.5%. So the Arab countries have taken an even bigger hit than the rest of the world, globally speaking. Look at it from another angle. What's been the hit for labour income? Well, in the Arab countries, income from labour has gone down by nearly 11%, the equivalent of 4% of GDP. So we've seen an enormous hit to labour markets, whatever angle you look at them from. And I think what's worth bearing in mind in the case of the Arab states is this comes on top of the pre-existing conditions that were there in advance of the pandemic. It's already been, the situation of youth in Arab labour markets has already been referred to for a very long time. Arab countries have recorded the highest levels of youth unemployment, double the average rates around the world. And when you talk about young women, I'm afraid the figures are really, truly distressing. So clearly, we have to act on the immediate impact of the pandemic, but it does seem the right time as well to address, as we think about building back, these longer-standing structural problems. Now, in the immediate term, I think that the emphasis must be, as countries around the world are doing, to try to stimulate economic activity, protect viable enterprises, preserve jobs, support incomes. And we've seen an enormous effort made around the world. The numbers are really eye-watering, aren't they? But we know very well, of course, and it's logical, that those high-income countries are able to make a much bigger effort than countries with a lower level of income. And we've seen a very skewed stimulus effort in that response. We sort of added this up into what we call a global stimulus gap calculation. It's a gap in funding which, if filled, would allow developing countries to make the same proportional stimulus effort relative to the damage being experienced on their labor markets as higher income countries. And that gap is 982 billion US dollars. But if you take the subset of the lowest income countries, it would require only the reallocation of 1% of the stimulus effort made by the high income countries to fill that gap. And I think that international dimension to responding to this pandemic is one that deserves our attention. A couple of other points. Firstly, we do need, in the light of what has been said about where the sharpest impact of the pandemic is coming, we do need to be truly attentive to the most vulnerable in our labour markets. Young people are being hit in numerous ways. They started off in a worse place. Their access into the labour market is blocked by and large. They're being expelled from jobs in larger numbers than other workers. So young people, and again with that thought to young women, is particularly important. Please let's not forget the plight, and I'm afraid that is the right word to apply in many cases, of migrant workers who in many ways find themselves often in extreme difficulty and who are so important in many labour markets of Arab countries. And the informal economy. Too easily forgotten, isn't it, that 6 out of 10 workers in the world work in conditions of complete informality. And the Arab world is just above the global average in that respect. So all of these things, I think, need to be addressed. I do agree that the best way to think about moving forward from where we are today is not trying to scrabble back to where we started, to the status quo ante, because there are these pre-existing conditions and problems that we need to address. I don't think we should fall into the facility. I hear a lot of things said about a new normal, which I'm not sure help us very much, but we ought to set very clearly the types of ambitions that we want to move towards. And that does involve, I think, in many Arab labour markets, looking at structural transformations, very much as has been alluded to earlier on. It's a big task. It's one, I think, that we need to address collectively rather than individually as well. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is indeed a dramatic situation. And as you said a couple of times, particularly so for young people, for women, and obviously if you are in the intersection of being a young woman, you are particularly disadvantaged. And that takes me to Ghada. Thank you very much for joining us. For the benefit of everybody, we have just experienced the importance of accelerating access to digital, because Ghada had a really hard time to connect, making that point very clearly, but now she's with us. So Ghada, how do you see it in the Arab world? How do you see the situation? What in your opinion has been helpful to address the vulnerabilities of those in most difficult situation, youth and women? And great you managed to connect.
Thank you for the invitation. Can you hear me and see me now? Because it's been quite a challenge. Thank you very much. And I haven't been able to listen to the ideas discussed in the first part, but let me concur with what Guy said, that the Arab world is not in any better situation than the rest of the world. It is a very challenging situation indeed. And where we have started, the normal was not good. The normal was actually very challenging. And we have a lot to work on. However, for some reason, I feel that for this region, I am optimistic. I believe that this region has a lot of gap, but there is realization that things cannot go back to normal to where they were. I believe that there will be a bigger space for women and youth in the period forward. So a larger inclusion out of necessity, out of need for everybody to work, everybody to contribute, everybody to participate. So the COVID crisis, while exposing the fragilities and the inequalities, I think will push the governments in the region to invest more in digital infrastructure, to invest more in health, to invest more in education, and to make a bigger effort in formalizing the informal sector and providing a bigger space for the private sector. I believe we have a very vibrant private sector that needs more space and more inclusion and more opportunity. So if opportunities are given to the private sector, to the startups, to the young among the private sector, to those with ideas, if they get the needed support from governments, the needed environment that will help them flourish, I do believe that we can, see some of the leaps that we need to see. We have to work on finding local solutions. There is no uniform Arab world or uniform MENA region. The situation is very different. Countries in conflict and countries in the Gulf face different challenges than the ones faced in North Africa and the other ones faced in the Middle East. Of course, there are some common elements like the gender gap, like the demographic dividend, which is a plus for the Arab world, like the need for investment in better education. But the challenges are different. So I believe that helping locally is very important. And I do agree that the funding gap needs to be filled, that the funding gap and the money needed needs to be made available. We also have to pay attention to the topic of corruption in the region. We cannot afford corruption to affect the stimulus packages. We cannot afford corruption to allow any illicit financial flows or money laundering, because the situation is fragile as it is. So we have to really work, while working on big stimulus packages, on social protection systems, deepening them, improving them, we have to work on tackling corruption in social protection systems and corruption in providing the stimulus packages. So there is a need for a regional effort and a global effort to address issues of corruption.
Thank you very much. You have already stepped into what I want to ask you as a follow-up question, and actually that would be my question to all participants. What should be top of mind? What actions policymakers must take to help capture opportunities, to address the pressing needs in countries? And you have already said one of them is transparency, fight corruption. What would be the top of mind actions you want to see policymakers on this call embrace?
I would like them definitely, while the economic stimulus packages need to be bolstered. We need some very bold and aggressive stimulus packages that are big and generous and stay with us for some time. I do not mind, and I do understand that there is a gap in financing, but I believe some deficit should be allowed in exchange for jobs. We can live with some deficit here and there while if we are creating jobs. I would like to see governments investing in large infrastructure projects of the ones that are labor intensive, not the ones that are capital intensive, ones that will create jobs. So public works is very much needed, specifically in rural areas and in countries where there is a need to improve infrastructure that depends on public works and generate jobs is very much needed. I would like a legal framework and a governance framework that allows knowledge sharing, information sharing, and access to information and knowledge. Knowledge is wealth, so opening up and allowing the sources and the information to flow, not just the money to flow. So a flow of money, a flow of information, a very serious inclusion of women and youth in every single sector, and specifically in the sectors where youth can really innovate. We need to encourage innovation. Youth are innovative by nature, but they're not given the space. So innovation, I'd like to see courageous, bold governments willing to move forward, adopting new ideas, and allowing the private sector with every possible support and incentive to really generate jobs and to help in co-investing with governments and supporting the private sector, the ones that are at risk because of the crisis, but the ones that want to start up or wish to expand. I would like also to see money flowing in the region from the IFIs and different investors, because it's a very young region, because there is a very big gap and there is a very big need. And it is good. Investors are going to make money coming into this region. But of course, peace, security, and human rights. You cannot see development without having stability. So every effort for political stability, for peace and security, for protecting and addressing issues, of course, of terrorism, it's very difficult to call for investors to come, to call for the private sector to invest in education and health if the situation is politically unstable or if peace and security are not there.
Thank you very much. So job-rich infrastructure investments make sure that there is flow of knowledge and money, deficits for jobs. I want to turn to Geeta.
And social, if you allow me, social protection, of course, social protection that allows cash transfers to the poor. And you and I have worked on this.
True former social protection minister speaking. I can hear this. Excellent. I'm going to ask Geeta next, and I would ask the panelists to be very succinct. We are coming to the end of this first part. So you heard Ghada. What is international experience telling us? What must be priority to enhance this access to opportunity? Geeta.
Yes, my co-panelists made just excellent points all around, so I can be succinct here. What is absolutely clear again is, in terms of increasing access to opportunity and reducing inequality, is making sure that everyone has good quality education. And there are ways to incentivize that. So let me give you an example of what was done in Brazil, which is the Bolsa Familia, which was a conditional cash transfer made to families to ensure the children went to school. And we saw real results. Between 2003 and 2010, you had a much larger number of people who exited poverty, and education levels went up. I think this can be expanded further. We know that giving childcare support to women helps bring women into the workplace, and that pays for itself because you're going to get the tax revenues from women who work. Secondly, financial inclusion, digital transformation makes a big difference. Here's an example of India, Aadhaar, which was a digital identification platform, a number that was provided to people. And through that, social assistance has been able to be provided much more targeted, much less wastage. And similarly, it's also being linked to financial inclusion and to get people in. And I'm just going to leave with one last thought, which is, as this crisis has accelerated inequality, but we also have to be careful that it's also accelerated the move towards automation and a digital economy. And this has the risk of course, of worsening the inequality going forward, generating a problem of not enough jobs. So we have to be very careful about it. And I think what history has taught us is that the problem doesn't take care of itself. That's what we've learned from the past when it came to trade. We saw that global trade benefited a very large number of people, but then there were people who got left behind. Those people don't get taken care of automatically. It has to be, policy actions have to be taken to make sure that the people who are getting left behind get the right tools, get the right skilling, get the right support to move ahead. With that, I will stop.
Great all-around points, Gita. But the most important one, it's not going to fall from the sky. We have to work for inclusion. I'm going to turn to Guy. If you were to say one change in labor market policy to support better access to opportunities, what this change would be? And again, I'm mindful of time. So in 1 minute, one message that you want to convey, Guy.
Well, all of the above that Ghada and Gita have already said. I would add this need to formalize the informal economy, which looms so large in Arab countries as elsewhere. And just to insist, because I'm going to pick one thing, the social protection story. You know, we can celebrate to a certain extent the fact that since the pandemic hit, we've counted 1,400 ad hoc measures of social protection have been brought in. But that is testimony as well to the inadequacies of the previously existing systems. You know, it makes little sense to build safety nets when somebody's already hit the floor. You have to be a little bit more anticipatory. So we have to build social protection systems, which are very scant in the Arab countries right now.
Great message, and indeed very focused contribution, Guy. And I would finally turn to Stefan. We heard a number of times the importance of vibrant entrepreneurial youth. How to do that? How to get that entrepreneurship to deliver for the Arab world?
Right. So let me just say two quick things on that. First and foremost, dynamism and vibrant entrepreneurship needs contexts and environments in which to flourish. Unfortunately, too many economies in the region are not really providing good incentives for that vibrancy and private sector development, not least from those starting from below. I think it's a real opportunity to have a longer term vision of a more resilient, flexible economy that is less distorted than it is now. And I think that means measures taken now in the short run. Let's then keep in mind that we need to create that vibrancy and don't lock in further distortions now. And then the second thing is, it's extremely hard to do direct measures to tackle youth unemployment or entrepreneurship. In fact, we should start from the principle, and I'm doing as someone who works in government now again, actually say most things we try to do don't work. And I have a very critical attitude towards these active programs, and it's the learning agenda. Try things out, but be willing to learn. There are endless programs on entrepreneurships and on youth unemployment. I can assure you most the evidence will tell you don't work. There are some that work, and it will matter in your context. So learn all the time.
Great way to wrap up this fantastic panel. We are living in a fast-moving and more shock-prone world. So we have to be agile and adaptable. We have to learn fast from experience we accumulate. I want to refer to Ghada. She said the normal was not that good that we are starting from. And I want to say that why? Because I agree with everything that has been said in this panel. I wonder whether we want to build back, even if it is better. I personally believe we should build forward. It is for the future an economy that is vibrant, dynamic, agile, adaptable, and above all, one that is opening up space for everybody to contribute, for everybody to benefit. And one that is peaceful in a peaceful environment. I cannot let the importance of peace and security for achieving the objectives of development and access to opportunities. This is, it has been a tremendous pleasure to be the facilitator of this first panel. Don't go anywhere. We continue right away with the second panel for today. We would have Governor Al-Khalifa to take over from me. I know that it is hard in these virtual meetings, but let me say bravo to the panelists and thank you. Bravo, well done.
And I would like to thank you all for this productive exchange of views. It has a great value to the ongoing work of the G20 on enhancing access to opportunities for all. Throughout the entire event, I have been inspired by the interventions brought forward to address the challenges facing our region. The Arab region has been hit hard by the COVID-19 crisis with a greater impact on vulnerable segments. With economies gradually reopening, policymakers can use this opportunity to make informed policy decisions that enhance access to opportunities in the region and lay the foundation for an inclusive recovery. Without these opportunities, growth will remain unsustainable and fragile, increasing the risk of heightened social disparities. I would like to emphasize our collective responsibility to reinforce the momentum for cooperation. We need to address these challenges together, to work for the global public interest, and to lead boldly on the path to prosperity for our communities. I look forward to meeting you all in person and continuing our collaboration on inclusive growth. Until that time, I hope that COVID-19 is contained, the global economy is set on the path of recovery, and that you and your loved ones are safe and in good health. Thank you very much, and with that, the meeting is concluded. Thank you.